On behalf of the Directors Council, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the virtual rollout of the 2021 Economy Blueprint for Action. I'm Terry Caldwell-Johnson, Chair of the Directors Council. The Council is comprised of executive directors and CEOs of nonprofit and for-profit organizations who leverage their collective resources to the benefit of communities of color, in particular, individuals of African descent. We thank you for joining us today and agreeing to share with us the next 90 minutes of your afternoon as we discuss the Council's work focused on one economy. Our time together today will be spent in large and small group discussions. A panel comprised of our work group leads will share their body of work and set the stage for Zoom breakout sessions intended to allow our participants time to take a deeper dive into the report's content areas, data, and strategies. Today's One Economy Blueprint rollout comes at a difficult time in our country's history. Compounded by the impacts of a global pandemic on one hand and a racial reckoning on the other, today's event calls us to face two painful truths. One, despite undeniable progress, Black people living in the United States are not yet equal. And two, on nearly every measure of progress or success, Blacks fall short of our white counterpoints. Now, while some would like to argue both one and two, the number three item today is that we will share with you both the facts and the data that illuminate the impact of systemic racism on individuals of African descent right here in Polk County. As decision makers and leaders in our community, there is so much work to be done. The persistent disparities are undeniable and call us to accountability and to action. They call us to create a thriving community, and yes, they call us to create one economy. Today's event is your invitation to pull up a seat at the table and join us in this important work. For the past 6 years, with funding from the Northwest Area Foundation located in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Directors Council has been laser focused on establishing a plan to address the racial wealth divide. To start this afternoon's conversation, we have invited Kevin Walker, President and CEO of the Northwest Area Foundation. Kevin is a friend to the Des Moines community and the funder of the 2017 and 2021 economy reports of the Directors Council. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Walker to this afternoon's event. Kevin?
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker, the president of the Northwest Area Foundation. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be able to help kick off your launch event today for the Blueprint for Action that's been developed by the One Economy Initiative. When the Northwest Area Foundation began supporting this work in Des Moines, as well as similar efforts in 5 other cities, obviously we didn't know that when it came time for you to launch your Blueprint for Action, we'd all be in some degree of lockdown and shock based on a global pandemic. Nor did we know that another senseless killing of a Black man at the hands of police in my own community of Minneapolis-St. Paul would have shocked the conscience of the world and started again that long overdue reckoning in this country with our history of racism and injustice. We didn't know those things. But you know what isn't surprising is that both of those events have hit the Black community extremely hard. We think of the way the pandemic has played out in African American communities, and what we see is more devastating impact based on a whole array of factors that lead right to the kinds of work you folks are doing in Des Moines. So how do we take structures of injustice and tip them towards justice across all the different aspects of your community? Education, work opportunity, access to health care, access to financial capability, There is no more timely work I can think of as we try to rise to the challenges of 2020. The time has come for our country, our region, your state, your community to reckon with our real history. A history in which the Black community has been disadvantaged at every turn, underinvested in at every turn. That's the change we need to drive. So this is a time of grief and dislocation and struggle for many of us and for our communities. But it's also, for me, a time of hope. The hope is that we can seize this moment and really drive lasting change. What do we need in order to do that? We need Black voices. We need the insight and lived experiences of the Black community at the center of what we're trying to support. So for a funder like us, the work of the One Economy Initiative and this Blueprint for Action is right on point. It's the kind of work we want to be helping to support. We want to be finding and supporting solutions that are coming from the community that will help you build the self-determined future that you want. I wish we could all be together in person to launch the blueprint today. This is the next best thing. Just know that we at the Northwest Area Foundation are with you. We stand in admiration and in solidarity. And we wish you every success as you use this blueprint to change the structures that have disadvantaged the community for so long. We want to be your partners in that change. Thanks and best of luck. I look forward to seeing you again in Des Moines soon.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to the Northwest Area Foundation. As mentioned in Kevin's remarks, Des Moines joins the cities of Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, Minneapolis, and St. Paul in helping to move the needle on the racial wealth divide. We consider today's rollout the start of our community's race to the finish line we are calling One Economy. And we are thankful for the unwavering financial support and assistance of the Northwest Area Foundation. The Directors Council 2017 State of Black Polk County report revealed Des Moines and Polk County as a modern-day tale of two cities, a place where persistent disparities prevail in the areas of health, housing, employment, education, and financial inclusion. The 2020 Blueprint for Action that we are rolling out today not only updates the 2017 data, it also creates a plan of attack intended to place us in the starting blocks, armed with a set of tools and actionable strategies that will help us to set the pace as we run the race of a lifetime pointed towards our destiny, the One Economy finish line. The 2020 Blueprint for Action covers 5 issue areas: financial inclusion, employment, education, health, and housing. Each section of the report includes key data indicators, numeric goals, and a set of strategies intended to jumpstart this important work. The strategies laid out in the report are intended to be a starting place for the development of ideas, concepts, and policies that each of you will tailor to your own organization, your respective sector, and your own agencies. To help us introduce the blueprint and the data indicators and background that led to the development of the goals and strategies, we have invited Deidre DeGier, Director of the Polk County Financial Empowerment Center, to facilitate a discussion with our One Economy Work Group chairs. Jackie Easley, representing the health sector, Phil Herman, representing the housing sector, Jasmine Brooks, representing education, and Lonnie Daphne, representing employment. Thanks to each of you again for joining us. I am now pleased to turn over the floor to Deidre DeGier and our work group chairs. Deidre?
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to each and every one of our work group leaders. For a little bit of context, these are co-chairs, and you'll meet the others later on, of some incredible work that you're seeing today called our Blueprint for Action. After the One Economy report initially was done in 2017, we knew that that report could not stand on its own. And so over the last year and a half, these individuals have been working to figure out strategies that you could potentially incorporate in the work that you do. This is an opportunity for us to right now share some of the updates. And we have Jackie Easley here, we have Jasmine Brooks and Philip Herman, and then we also have Lonnie Daphne remotely at this point in time. And so thanks again for you all being here. The first question, so this One Economy report was huge. It was over 60 pages, and each and every one of you all's section had a number of data points. Can you talk a little bit about the data points that you selected and why they were important? And we will start with employment. Lonnie, are you with us?
I am, and thanks for the invite.
Thanks, Lonnie. So talk to us a little bit about the data points that your work group selected and why those are so important.
Yeah, so we took a look at Polk County, and again, looking at the unemployment rate in Iowa, looking at Polk County, but then again, honing in on the African Americans in Polk County, and being that the percentage of people unemployed that are employable or ready in the workforce was alarming for us. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the indicators or one of the data points that stood out and stuck out. And continued. The other was the median income that for those that are employed. How is it that we, can take a look at if you are employed yet if you're in, low wages, and with low wages comes, not the ability to not be able to have enough to save, to fall back on if something were to happen. And, obviously just like now we've reached a crisis. And so if you're employed and then unemployed, not being employed adds to all the other factors that we're going to talk about today. And so having a job and having a good paying job and the factors that we saw from the data is really necessary for us to dig into. So that's how we got to our data.
Sure. And just to piggyback off of Lonnie, one of the data points that you all will see in the document, once you look through it, is that there is about a $30,000 difference disparity as it relates to the African American median household income compared to all of Polk County. And we know right now, it wouldn't take us a moment's notice to figure out what we could do with an additional $30,000. And that is one of those disparities that Lonnie speaks to. Jackie, talk to us a little bit about the health components, those data points that you all selected. Why are they so important?
Well, thank you, Deidre. And as you know, we wanted to take a deeper dive into the health gaps that you have mentioned that are intersectional really with all the other areas that you're going to talk about today, with education, with housing, with employment. And then coronavirus hit. And I want to tell you that in healthcare, we often say that when America catches a cold, the Black community gets pneumonia. And that is exactly what happened. If you look at the COVID stats, national, and even here in Des Moines, even here in Iowa, where African Americans represent only about 4% of our state population. Yet today, as we sit here and speak, we are 10% of the tested positive COVID individuals in the state.
10%.
10%.
Wow. So
we want to, using the statistics that we started out with in the report, why we have 13.3% of our African Americans who lack access to health care via insurance, which should, in a state where we offer Medicaid expansion, should not have that disparity. And then why 67% of African Americans do not have a primary care physician. Now we hope that through the increase and expanded use of telehealth services in the state, with an opportunity to provide more technology resources, that we can further eliminate that gap.
Right. And here's a prime example. Our health growth work group worked feverishly to figure out strategies as it related to those data points. And as Jackie mentioned, with COVID happening, another opportunity opened up to expand care, and telehealth is one of those things. Jasmine, can you talk to us a little bit about the shift that's happened with our students as it relates to education and COVID, and has that impacted you all's, the education work group's blueprint for action?
Absolutely. I think that everything that we kind of hit on here in the blueprint has just been exacerbated by results of COVID. So when we're looking at Black discipline in our schools, what does that look like when students are no longer there and then they come back? What does that look like for them when we have preschoolers who don't have the regular routine of going to school, and then they're now in kindergarten after missing half a year? How do they respond to that not knowing? So it definitely adds a new kind of sector to the report that we had not had to look at prior to.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that there is even more of a need for some of the strategies that you all have outlined in light of this challenge that we have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. And Philip, last but not least, talk to us a little bit about the data points that you all selected and why they're so important.
Well, there's really two that we really looked at, and that is that the number of Black people who rent their home compared to the general population. You have numbers that are 69.3 compared to 36 or 32.9. Mm-hmm. It's a radical number difference to see that. And then when you look at those that are cost burdened African American renters versus the general population, you've got a staggering number of 53.3 compared to 39.2. And so the question becomes why? Well,
talk to us a little bit about what cost burden means, because some folks choose to be cost burdened, but right. We're looking at something a little bit different here.
Right, and so what we're looking at is compared to what you earn in your income compared to what you pay for your rent, and if you're above that 30% threshold, you become now cost burdened. It's not fair to be spending 50% of your income, 60% of your income on a home. And that's what we mean by the cost burden.
So if we're looking at $30,000 for the average median Black household, a third of that is going to go towards housing. Right. So we're going to take $33,000, we're going to subtract that by $10,000. So that leaves $23,000 for a year for that African American family to take care of that family.
That's right.
Average child care costs are $10,000. So we take that, $10,000 left. What are we going to do with $10,000 for the rest of the year? That definitely gives us some perspective. Jackie, I'm going to piggyback off of you because we're talking about the challenges that we're seeing as it relates to income. Those challenges not only impact an individual's income. A recent study showed us that 69% of workers were stressed over their finances, with fully 72% of them admitting that they are stressing about their finances at work. And their productivity on the job is impacted by stress over finances. One of your work group's focuses was mental health. What does that mean for us?
Well, Deidre, we always were concerned about the lack of adequate mental health services in the state, but now compounded with financial, many African Americans are essential or frontline workers, so keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. So the stress for them is every day going to work as a grocery clerk, as a patient care technician, and possible exposure to, one of the deadliest viruses that we have encountered. And with all of the other stresses that they face on a daily basis. 1 out of 3 African-American youth have some mental health syndromes that have been undiagnosed. And so all of these things compound. We spoke earlier about telehealth. We are hopeful that we can reach more individuals, but most important, particularly for the African American community, is erasing the stigma of obtaining help. And I think that is going to be probably our primary objective after we do this dive into these statistics, partnering with groups like the Directors Council and others in our community to work together and assure people that mental health services are for everyone.
And is it your thought that we can expand mental health through telemedicine?
Absolutely, because part of erasing the stigma is helping people where they are access health services. And so if we need to reach people in their homes, on their phones, that can be one way that we alleviate the anxiety of going to a actual psychiatrist's office for those particular individuals.
You know, speaking of stigmas, Jasmine, I'm coming back to you on education. One of the things that this blueprint revealed to us that Black students account for 10.5% of Polk County school population, yet the suspension rate is 35.5%. Whites make up 70.9% of the school population, and their suspension rate is 38.7%. So we're seeing, you know, two distinctly different populations making up a dramatic difference, 10% versus 70, yet they have similar suspension rates. Can you tell us what factors are involved in those disproportionate suspension rates?
Over the course of working with folks in the community, being a parent myself, being a part of school board meetings, things like that, we've kind of come across this on numerous occasions. And so there have been several different factors that have kind of gone into this, but the top three that we really focused in on with this group was implicit bias, which has been talked about a lot lately. It's pretty much everywhere. You can go to Harvard online and take an implicit bias test for yourself at home. So it's becoming more prevalent that people are aware of that. The second is the lack of culturally relevant and accurate curriculum. And that's something that, as Black Lives Matter matters has kind of expanded in this community. We're becoming more aware of that, and we're asking for that. And then the third one was a lack of diversity and representation in schools and the systems as a whole. So having teachers that look like our students, having teachers who are culturally aware of what our students go through in their upbringing and where they come from. And so those were the top three things that, although sometimes they may seem unrelated, we found that they're very related from the perspective of our students, from the perspective of our teachers. And so it all works together systematically to disadvantage our students when it comes to discipline.
Lonnie, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm coming back to you. You know, we talked a great deal about income and the gaps, and I'm curious, with the disparity as large as $30,000 for the average median income for Black families, what can we do to shrink that gap?
Yeah, great question. And so some of the stuff that we were looking to dig into was, again, if in the end we think about those that are unemployed, so we have two factors. We have an unemployment population, but we also have some that are in the labor force, those that are employed and ready to be employed. And so in addressing the $30,000, the biggest issue is finding those higher paying positions, but that then means there's a skill gap. So how do we train individuals to fill those jobs that are readily available, because the lower wages are in the lower paying jobs? So if I'm in the lower wages, my income is not going to increase, and I can go job to job, or that then requires someone to work maybe 2 to 3 jobs to equal or fill in that $30,000 gap. So what we're hoping or taking a look at is what skill building needs to happen, but also how is it that we get those positions that are ready, get a talent pool ready available for those jobs that are available, and make that match. So where do we link up with those programs that are doing the actual skill building and professional development, but also where are those organizations that are, again, saying we have job availability? How do we match those individuals to close that gap for that $30,000 plus? Because again, and when we have the high unemployment rate, and you're taking a job that has low wages, with lower income, that means you have less savings to fall back on. And again, because in this demographic, there is higher poverty, the cycle just keeps going. So we have to get people out of the lower paying positions, get them skill build, talent ready to enter a workforce. But that also then requires a company to pull through. So if we get this talent ready and available for you, that means they need to be hired into those positions that are going to make up that gap for the $30,000 that we're talking about.
So Philip, if we do what Wani just said, and we shrink the disparities as it relates to wages, and we get people skilled up, is that organically going to solve the housing crisis, or is there something more that we can do there?
Well, can I tell a story?
Sure.
I think there's an example that I live on the north side of Des Moines, and we had a couple that was near retirement, a Black man and his wife, and he came over and we sat in lawn chairs all afternoon and we just started sharing stories. And he talked about he had grown up in the Deep South. He had been educated in a segregated school, had some teachers that took an interest in him, got him onto an educational path. He got a really good degree. His wife got a really good degree. They ended up in Des Moines, and they ended up my neighbor. They were renting that house across the street from us for $1,200 a month. They stayed there for 8 years.
Wow.
They moved at retirement age with no equity, with nothing that was built up. So part of this is, yes, we can get people educated. Yes, we can get them employed, but there's still a disconnect between communicating to people that ownership is a way that you build wealth in this country. And if you don't have that path, if people are not coaching you, if people are not providing the opportunity through banks, if we don't have realtors that are showing you that path, people end up like my neighbor, right? And that's part of, I think, what we have to wrestle with is, this is not just a cookie cutter solution. Right? This is a complex problem that we've got to put some pieces together.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, when you talk about the financial sector and the availability of these products, you know, we know so many people that when COVID hit us, they were calling their banks for home equity lines of credit, just in case, because they had a home and they could loan against that home in the case that they needed to. But if you didn't own a home, you didn't have that luxury. There wasn't even an option for you. We also know that African Americans are 2 times more likely to be denied for loans. And so there's a great deal of work that we have to do as it relates to financial inclusion, which weaves all of you all together, every single one of you all. I mean, as it relates to access to education, you know, people shouldn't have to go to a private school to ensure that their students are gonna get the knowledge that's gonna lead them into a progressive path. As it relates to access to mental health, money should not be the where the buck ends or stops for people to access mental health services or any type of health care. Yet, over 50% of the African American population in Polk County is either banked or are underbanked or unbanked. Now, 50% of folks don't have real relationships with their financial institution. And we've got to figure out how to resolve that. We've got to figure out how to resolve that. All right, we're ending on our time here, but I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to share some last words with people. What I want you to do right now is just really share with people why this work is important to you, right? Because we've got a number of people that are listening right now, and some of them are trying to figure out how they incorporate what you all will then speak to this afternoon into their work ethic and how they operate within their community or within their work. And so I want you all to share why you've invested this time and energy into this project and what it means to you. We'll start with you, Ms. Lonnie.
Awesome, thank you. Why it's important, why this work is important, why this topic is important, and certainly I have employment. But in the end, really, it's important to understand that all of these factors weigh heavily on a community. And in trying to navigate one, you may hiccup or cause crisis in the other. And so why it's important for people to understand that there really is a tale of two cities. And it's the person sitting right next to you. It is the person that you're making potential assumptions about, but it's real. And the facts are there, the reality is there. So why it's important is because now more than ever is time to make sure that we really, really, really do the work and meaningful actions so that there is one economy. Because in the end, as I know people think and say, you know, it's the human race, there's a group of people that'd like to join in.
Thank you for sharing, Lonnie. Thank you. Philip.
Well, this is important to me because affordable housing, we talk about affordable housing, we talk about trying to get people into homes that make sense for them, that they can own and have a tangible place that they call their own.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done to this point is not working. And so this is really, really critical that we begin to look at new strategies of what we can do different, and just continuing to dump things into the same buckets that we've always dumped it is not going to change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Jasmine.
To me, I became really heavily involved in education because it primarily helped me coming from Des Moines to make a difference in my own life and the lives of my family. And then when I had kids a few years ago, it was a completely different perspective for me to know that my children would enter into this educational system that's not broken, but was built in a way that would disadvantage them. And so it really hit me at that point that it's not just me trying to get through this system, it's my children, it's my children's children, it's my nieces, my nephews, my cousins, it's my family. And so as I started to think about that in my large family network, then I started to think about friends, and I started to think about the networks that they have and how many children I actually know when I walk into the school building who are facing the same systematic oppression in education. And so at that point, it hit me that if I don't do something as a parent, then what am I really doing? And so to me, that's why this work is important. That's why it's important for parents to be involved. It's important for previous students to be involved. It's important that if we want to change the way the future looks for our children, that we're proactive now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I also concur with Jasmine that it often does come down to being personal. And it's very interesting because all of the areas that we are talking about today, housing, I had an opportunity to influence the zoning code of Des Moines, serving on the zoning commission. Education, I'm a Des Moines school graduate myself and served on the Des Moines school board and have personal interactions with healthcare and understand how important it is for people to feel that they can access healthcare. And you know, all the things that we have been talking about from the standpoint of healthcare are called social determinants of health. Mm. So goes these other important critical areas in one's history and in one's life. So goes the health of that individual and family, and so goes the health of our community.
Thank you all so much for sharing. If you haven't heard it here right now, this is a holistic perspective that we're presenting to you today, because the condition of our community requires a holistic solution. And so we are excited about what is to come, and we are excited about your engagement. When you go into these breakout sessions with these lovely individuals partnered with their co-chairs, be willing and open to hear, but hear with the intent of performing afterwards, doing something afterwards, searching for something that you can do to make a difference in your community. Thank you again for tuning into this panel. I'm going to push it back over to Ms. Terry Caldwell-Johnson. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you to our panelists. I know that the people on the other side of the screen are probably applauding and thanking you for not only the foundational information that you have provided on the One Economy Blueprint, but more importantly, the passion that you bring to this work. Everything that's in this blueprint would not be possible were it not for our work groups and our work group leads. So thank you very much for your investment in this important work. What we know for sure about building One Economy is that it's going to take a lot of approaches. It's going to take a lot of minds, and it's also going to require all hands on deck. This is not an issue just for the Black community. It is one that will take the collective minds, muscle, and energy of everyone living in Des Moines. Simply put, we all have a place in One Economy, and it's really about the fierce urgency of now. If nothing else, the data for One Economy magnifies and exposes the likelihood that the economic disparities that exist for the county's African American constituents also exist for our larger community. It also reminds us that celebrating the progress of the region requires an examination of the persistent disparities that exist. Bottom line, One Economy challenges us to reimagine our future and to think about the difference between what has been deemed acceptable versus what is possible and what is right. So today we simply want to thank you for joining us, but more importantly, we want to thank you for joining us as we collectively act on One Economy. The One Economy Blueprint for Action provides a clear picture of the issues and answers the who, what, why, where, and when questions. It invites our businesses, our policymakers, and our leadership at all levels to take notice and to make their place at the table. We're going to encourage everyone to download the One Economy report by going to the tdcdsm.org/One Economy website link. And we also are asking you to not only become familiar with the blueprint, but to share the report, the data, and the contents with those within your sphere of influence. We want you to read and commit to the statement of action, a simple way for you to become a part of the movement. And we want you to utilize the resources on the TDC website to educate and inform yourself about this work. The real work starts now, and as we get ready to move into our breakout sessions where you'll have an opportunity to do a deeper dive, we just want to ask you one final time to join us as we run the race towards One Economy. Our breakout sessions will create a solid framework for you to not only understand the data, the strategies, and also the actionable steps that you can take. And we also want to make sure that you realize that this is just the start. There are any number of ways that you can become involved in this work and identify the strategies that are best within your workplace, your network, or your sphere of influence. I know that our technicians behind the scenes are working now to get everyone moved into their breakout rooms. Those of you that stay in the main room, which is the room that we're on right now, will focus on financial inclusion, and everyone else will be sorted out to the other 4 areas of the report: housing, education, employment, and health. I believe that they are getting ready to move people now, and that is taking place. So if you give us just another moment and be patient, hopefully you will be moved to your breakout session. Those will take about 20 minutes, and then you will be moved to a second session. For those of you that signed in late and did not actually get assigned a room, we are going to be manually assigning those rooms. So again, if you'll be patient with us, we'll be able to move to those breakout rooms shortly. And again, I want to thank you. After we finish with the breakout sessions, we'll join back here in the main room, and we'll have just a few takeaways. But again, thank you for joining us, and we will get ready to move to our breakout rooms now. Thank you.
Hi there, this is the Financial Inclusion Room. If you stuck around by default, you landed here. And don't tell the other work group leaders this, but I think financial inclusion is the most important. just joking. I'm just joking. But needless to say, thanks for choosing this selected room. We're going to go through really quickly so that we can open it up for questions and comments from you all. And we'll start with the first side. One of the indicators that we chose was the unbanked and underbanked numbers. And the reason why those numbers were so important to us is because we knew that in order for an individual to truly have financial sustainability, that having a relationship with a financial institution brought them closer to that. And that slide is coming up right now so that you can see that. And our goal is by 2025 to decrease those numbers by 5%. Now, when we look at our unbanked and underbanked numbers, I mean, the disparity is large. Our unbanked numbers, unbanked means that individual doesn't have a relationship with a financial institution. They're probably using payday lenders, pay cards, prepaid cards that have astronomical fees, make it very, very challenging to budget. 22.1% of our Des Moines Black residents are unbanked. Statewide, that's 3%. Underbanked, that number is 31.8%. Statewide, it's 13.5%. And so when it comes down to those unbanked and underbanked numbers, we've got to do a better job of ensuring that our African American folks have a relationship with an additional or have a relationship with a financial institution. The other indicator that we showed is our loan approval rates. And Heather, you can go to that slide. Our loan approval rates, African Americans are 2 times more likely to get denied for a loan. 2 times more likely to be denied for a loan. It's something that we just got through talking about earlier in the panel. And what that says is that having access to additional dollars increases people's opportunity, gives them flexibility, things of that nature. But when a community of people are 2 times more likely, their flexibility in the financial sector is pretty much dismal. It's non-existent. They really don't have flexibility, which puts them behind the starting line even further. Our goal is, it's small but mighty, and that's a 0.5% increase in the Black loan approval rating by 2025. Why is that number so low? Well, you know, there are a lot of factors that are beyond our community control. It's going to take large corporations that are creating accounts and financial products that meet the needs of this specific population. And that may or may not be a moneymaker for them, but at the end of the day, we know that that's necessary. The second indicator that we found was the number of Black-owned businesses in our community. We have a number of businesses that exist within our community, yet the data doesn't reflect that. Our goal as it relates to small businesses is to increase the number of small Black-owned businesses by 2025 to 2%. And that slide is coming up for you so that you can see that one as well. Now, why is that important? Well, many of our businesses that are operating in the Black community may or may not have a connection with the Secretary of State's office. They may not be registered or filed with the IRS. They simply have a gift, a talent, a service that they are offering to their community. And in offering that gift, talent, or service to their community, they may be disconnected from traditional mainstream knowledge of small businesses. And so I'm going to start here with some of our solutions. A solution here, one, is to provide technical assistance for our small business owners. This is something that has been done through a number of different organizations in our community, including the Financial Empowerment Center. The Directors Council has invested a great deal of dollars into this as well to ensure that Black businesses are leveling up, if you will. They're using point of sale services and not relying on cash-based systems. They're analyzing their sales as a result of using point of sale systems. They're encountering coaches that can really help them think through their decision making. As an entrepreneur, you're often in this bubble by yourself. And by connecting with coaches, by connecting with the community that understands, what it takes to really be successful as it relates to being a business owner. This is shown to, and it's shown us over time that this is something that really strengthens someone's likelihood of staying in business. The threshold for business owners is 5 to 6 years. If you can make it 5 to 6 years, you're on to something. And so many of our well thought out business owners just needing a little bit more attention, a little bit more technical assistance. We found that over time, their likelihood of staying in business increases astronomically. Now, as it relates to the loan indicator, that one is, as I shared earlier, is really a matter of strengthening our financial systems so that our financial products are meeting people where they are. And what does that mean? Sometimes a financial product doesn't need to cost. Because costing, whether it's $5 or $25 or $50 to opening an account, for people who are not connected and not culturally sensitive to the framework of corporations, a financial institution is intimidating. And if you're asking them to enter into your institution at a cost, it shrinkens their ability to go. And so we want to make sure that our financial institutions are being very, very thoughtful in how they create products, being very, very thoughtful in how they're connecting with communities, how they're marketing their products and services with communities to build a level of trust that simply does not exist right now. And in building that level of trust, it is then that we can get people banked so that unbanked and underbanked becomes obsolete for us, that it is a norm for people to have relationships with financial institutions and maximize their ability in those relationships. Now going back to the original indicator, which is our unbanked and underbanked numbers. It goes in tandem with loans. We're having a separate conversation because the disparities are just really astronomical between the two indicators, but I think it's really going to take a holistic perspective on ensuring that we are connecting people with financial products. The other side of the token that you'll see in this blueprint is increasing the availability of financial education. In the work that I've done, we realized that folks are not going to make it a large enough priority to go and meet with a coach. And the list of all of the things that they have to do day in and day out, going to see a financial coach probably keeps going farther and farther down the list. And so again, as we're asking financial institutions to meet people where they're at with good products, low to no dollar products and services, we also have to make sure that our nonprofit organizations are making a full endowed commitment to ensure that financial education is a part of their service delivery model. If you're offering housing, if you're offering counseling, if you're offering any type of social service to elevate the community, it would behoove you to incorporate financial education because they're going to come to you. The individual is going to meet you wherever you need them to be so that they can get that service. Let's put on financial education to that factor. Those are our 3 indicators, and I'll open it up for discussion. Right now, I probably talked a little bit longer than I should have, but we'll open it up for discussion right now if there are any questions.
Hi, Deidre. This
Deidre?
Oh, sorry.
Hi, you guys are talking. I hear you. Yes.
Can I ask a question? I'm more interested, like, how do you build this knowledge into a youth audience? Is there a way that the financial inclusion piece is connected to the youth audience?
Yes, and we've done this on a couple of occasions. Oak Ridge's Summer Youth Employment Program and Evelyn K. Davis Summer Youth Employment Program, we incorporated coaching into their Summer Youth Employment Program. And so before they started, they were given some guidelines on spending principles, learning about savings, learning about spending, We had them establish goals for what they were going to do with their money before they spent their dollars. We've also gone into the schools and incorporated this knowledge into our schools through after-school programs and different organizations that the students have, talking about needs and wants. One of the greatest graphics that we can show our students is the earning potential graphic that shows them essentially, what their education attainment is correlated with what their average income would be in the future. We've also done, if you've ever done a homelessness simulation or poverty simulation, we have done these simulations with our students to give them knowledge of what it takes to run a household. And so our students would tell us what they were interested in being, and we would couple their interest as their future interest with a dollar amount. And they literally went to pay rent, they went to buy groceries, they went to the doctor's office, but it became more real for them and how they were spending their money, because we simulated the experience. And not only we simulate the experience, but we also showed them how they could incorporate healthy spending habits into their own spending for their summer youth money.
Is there a connection that shows that, how your financial inclusion is also related to like where you're going in the zip code, where you're moving? Oh,
of course. Okay. Zip code is definitely an indicator. When we look at the 50314 and the poverty that exists in that community, and the unemployment that exists in that community, that is definitely a factor as it relates to an indicator, right? Like those zip codes for me are basically jewel mines from my vantage point. That's where we need to focus our attention. When we see the high influx in poverty and we see the transientness as it relates to housing, those are all indicators for us that say we need to focus a lot more energy on financial inclusion and provide more coaching to those communities.
Love it, Deidre. Please share if any curriculum that you like and you follow. That would be wonderful also.
Of course, some curriculum that is very handy and free to everyone. FDIC offers curriculum through their Money Smart Week, but it's long-term throughout the year. We also at Financial Empowerment Center can come in and provide coaching and workshops to students and things of that nature. And I know that many of our financial institutions do that as well. What I would beckon our financial institutions to do is when you walk into the room and talk with our students, make it not be about your financial institution. If you can avoid using your logo, it's going to go a long way for our folks.
Okay.
Got another question.
Meredith?
Meredith has a question.
Hi, thanks. I was watching the virtual Lesbians Who Tech conference last week, and a speaker talked a lot about the idea that as long as we have capitalism, we're going to have racism systemically. How can we help with capitalism or to fight capitalism, so to speak, here in order to help fight some of this and combat some of this for financial literacy and those sorts of things in terms of the One Economy report?
I don't know that I would agree with that statement because the mode and means in which we are operating right now is that in order to positively impact the Black community and decrease disparities that exist, we have to create spaces for the Black experience. And sometimes that looks like a focus group, sometimes that looks like hiring Black individuals, sometimes that looks like placing Black people on boards that are interested in the subject matter in which that board governs. And so I think the closer we get to doing that, the better, because we've seen capitalism work for just the regular white person, right? But through that, they have the luxury of a number of things that African Americans don't. I just spoke about our students. We're looking at students that are 16 and 17-year-olds with terrible credit scores already. Why? Wow. Because their family had to put the water bill in their name. The family had to put their electric bill in their name. I think that when we think about fighting capitalism and fighting racism, we relinquish our ability to defend the things that are right and ensure that we are defending the people that need to be defended. And in defending people, you will fight, right? But you have to come with the posture of somebody needs you if you have value to add to their lives.
Thanks so much for your perspective. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Next question.
So there's a question from Carol Paquette. Is there any insight on if under or unbanked Black people is cultural based, in parentheses, or lack of knowledge?
You know, it stems back to the first Black bank after Reconstruction. Abraham Lincoln authorized that African Americans could own their own bank. Previously, African Americans could not even get a bank account. And so Frederick Douglass was chatting with, I guess, his friend, Abraham Lincoln, and so we need a Black bank. And so Freedmen's Bank was started. And at its peak, Freedmen's Bank had, I think, what would be an equivalent of 80 some odd million dollars in assets. And the bank was doing well. African Americans were able to keep their money safely. They didn't have to put it in a shoebox or a mattress or a freezer or hide it anywhere in a field. They had a proper financial institution to put their dollars into. Well, what happened to Freedmen's Bank was people saw the success of that bank and they took advantage of that success. What was then authorized by the federal government was that whites could loan against those African American dollars. These were white businesses that did not have money invested in Freedmen's Bank, but they loaned against the dollars that these Blacks had accumulated. And as a result, about 95% of those dollars were lost. 95%. And so it was then that African Americans began to distrust financial institutions because it did not seem like that was an ally for them. And so we are rebuilding some of that conditioning that exists, that you don't trust financial institutions, you don't trust attorneys, you don't trust CPAs, that there's a big cultural shift that we are in process trying to make internally. But in the process, as we are asking folks to then trust these institutions, it's important that these institutions are worthy of our trust. And as it exists right now, there is a lot of work that needs to be done to repair some of these damages that have happened, you know, for centuries.
Steve Eggleston.
Steve Eggleston.
Hey, Deidre, thank you. I have a question and then I want to follow it up with a statement. Under the indicated loan approval rates for Black people, do you have an idea of loan amounts when you look historically at the number of loans that were actually made? Do you have and I apologize, I haven't looked at your One Economy document yet. I was just curious to see if there's a range you're talking about there.
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. And those numbers are very, very difficult to come by. We were able to get some 2017 data that you won't see in this report, but it is one of the things that started this road to One Economy as it related to SBA loan allocations. I believe in 2017, the data was we had over 144 million loans, or 144 million in loans that went out that year. And out of the 144 million, African Americans received nothing.
The reason I bring that up is, and we're talking about small businesses, we're talking about entrepreneurship, and you all, everybody on this call has heard this before, but I'm a big proponent of microloans, and you have the ability to build credit, you have ability to build your business without having to go to a financial institution, have large amounts, have to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I just put that out there as a consideration during this conversation.
Correct. You know, microloans is definitely value added. Unfortunately, in our community, the access to microloans isn't as prominent in some of our sister cities like Minneapolis. And we have to do a better job of creating those opportunities, because when you get a microloan, typically what that microloan does is it gives you also a little bit more access to the education, right? Because those individuals, the entities that are providing that microloan want to ensure that they're not setting you up for failures. They don't want to give you the money for the credit bureau to then receive notice that you haven't paid in 30, 60, 90 days. And so the microloan component is is very, very important, but what is tied to that and what makes it more important is the education that comes along with that. Other questions?
Thank you.
Frank Thomas, and I'm going to give you that number. I was incorrect. The number for the SBA, this was 2015 data. There were 444 loans in 2015, and the amount was 134 million. And African Americans, I stand corrected, African Americans received 2 of those 444 loans to the amount of $30,000.
Wow.
$30,000.
Well,
Frank Thomas.
thank you. Thank you. That was a good correction, but it really highlights what kind of problems we have in that area. I want to appreciate all the information you've said about education and the kinds of things that's been going on about banking and unbanking. We do need to attack it from another side, which I don't know that I heard, which is educating the banks and the credit unions about what is going on with looking for potential clients, customers for credit unions and banks, and also having them to rewrite their language in terms of what does this document look like when someone is reading it for the first time. They like to use terms that are going to protect them and to say information that they need to have said, but it can get pretty confusing when you're trying to go through a loan and get this information and then get the documents back to the credit union or to the bank. So I would suggest we find ways to help them rewrite their documents to be legal, but as well as to be clear and understandable, and to have them go through information as to how to view potential clients and customers, especially the view that the person walking in who is a person of color is not automatically viewed as having a great deal of problems, and that they're already on the road toward denial. The last thing is I want to highlight what was said earlier about looking at the credit history of people, because due to trying to make it through life, they've had to do a lot of things. As you said, put the name of the person receiving utilities in the name of a child who then has a bad history when they started going. So that's something that needs to be talked about and educated at the credit unions and the banks. Thanks, I'll stop there.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Frank, and thanks for popping on. You know, when we see 70% of our African-American households leasing or renting their homes, that's another indicator for us that could go in the favor of African-Americans. What would it be like? Because the credit bureaus allow this. What would it be like if our landlords were required to allow African-Americans to opt in to them reporting their rental history? You know, they get a credit check to stay in that facility, and if something happens, and if they owe that individual, the landlords will report the bad nature that exists or the bad behavior to the credit bureaus. And so if we know that folks are renting, like Philip said earlier, you know, a family renting $1,200 a month for 8 years, and they have nothing to show for it. There's definitely some work that can be done there, for sure. Last question.
Patrick Dix had a question.
Patrick Dix, last but not least.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, can you hear me now?
Patrick.
Hi, I was just wondering, and I think this kind of circles around some of the discussion that you were already having, how much of this, if any, in the research that was done is a compliance issue. I think if you talk to bankers, some of what they would tell you is that they have a checklist of things that have to be in a loan document. And so how much of this is language, as was pointed out before, but how much is also a compliance burden for the bank where they will reject a loan because they're trying to protect, they're going to get hit from their regulator if they do something wrong. So where can we take back some of or repair some of what was done in Dodd-Frank to make loans, particularly smaller loans, more accessible to the Black community?
That's a good point, an excellent point. You are exactly right about when we talk about the system being broken and the unintended consequences as a result of the system, Dodd-Frank is one of those, for sure. All right. Well, thank you all so much. You're about to be popped into another focus group. Please, if there are any other additional questions, we're going to put my information into the chat so that you all can contact me at your own time. But this is an element that you know, it takes more than a nonprofit. It takes national corporations to help us move the needle on this one. And so I'm anybody that's willing to step up and do something as it relates to small business ownership and financial inclusion. We would love for you all to sign on and be of some help. Thank you. You are being moved now, but be patient. If there is anybody else that has a question. Or you can stay here and we'll talk more about finances. I'll give you some different things to chew on. What were some of the questions?
There's one that says the culture of American banking is not receptive to most Black people. How to address the culture of banking?
So one of the questions was around the culture of banking. And I think the culture of banking is actually centered around goals, right? The bottom line, the dollars. And so if a Black individual walks in and you've got a white banker, you know, they are seasoned to believe that is going to be a hard task. So I'm gonna go tell this person to do this, this, and that. Give them the runaround, slow down their roll so that I can focus on customer over here. And we've seen that happen in banking. And it's not an indicator for me that the banker is a racist or a prejudice, but the banker has a job to do. And so when we look at our organizations, our financial institutions, and, you know, how are they incentivizing their team members working in diverse sectors? How are they incentivizing their team members ensuring that diverse populations are accessing their financial products? Is it a priority for that financial institution to have diversity in their customer base, right? Those are things that if you make it a priority, you'll do what it takes to accomplish it. But so many of our financial institutions just want money. They don't care who it's coming from. But the unintended consequences is that we've got people left out of the mainstream financial sector. And when they're left out of the mainstream financial sector, they're siloed. One of the things that we talked about earlier on in this report was the crime rates. 30% of the crimes that are committed by African Americans are alternative forms of economic gain. Robbery. Oh, you're coming back to this room? Everybody's coming back to this room right now. So I'll finish the thought. Robbery, theft, selling illegal narcotics, or even selling cigarettes, selling water on the side of the streets. These are all alternative forms of economic gain. And if we could fix infusing people into the economy, then our crime rates are going to reduce. You know, the challenges that it relates to the disparities are going to deplete themselves. The disparities as a result will reduce as well. And so there's a great deal of work that we can do as it relates to finances. You all are coming back into this room. Hi. You're not going to be here very much longer because we're putting you into your second breakout session. I hope that there was plenty that you learned. Remember, it is not start and end here. Terry said earlier, you have a place, pull up your chair. We're in this for the long haul. And so I'm encouraging you, if you didn't do it in your last work group, share your information with the folks that are interested in the work group that you're in so that we could start, you know, forming some synergies around this work that are intentional as it relates to positively impacting the Black community.
Deidre, if I could just 1 second make a comment on what you said about banking. I'm not a banker, but I have a banker on my team. I work for a bank as a financial advisor. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is that if you want a company to do business and interact well with their clients, then the employees of that bank need to look like their client base. So if we want to increase the ability of African Americans and minorities to do business with the banks, then the banks need to commit to making sure that their employees at all levels are inclusive. And that doesn't just include African Americans, but I would say, you know, in all ways be inclusive. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. You know, in our financial inclusion work group and our housing work group, one of the things that was discussed quite a bit is when we were thinking about bringing on professionals, Black professionals, to add some value to the conversation. It was challenging finding Black professionals in the financial sector and in the housing sector. And what that told us was that, you know, the interests of African Americans aren't even represented as it relates to the employer level. And, you know, just imagine if you've got somebody in a room where you're about to unveil Dodd-Frank and they're like, wait a minute, let's think about this unintended consequence, because I understand this probably a little bit differently from you because I live this, or I've got family members who live this, right? We want people on our teams that have expertise. And I think that our expertise now, as we're talking about this, is expanding beyond what formidable education can do. Expertise also can be reliant on experience, right? The experience of being culturally connected to a group of people that have historically been disenfranchised. There's value in that. There's value in it. And you can have both. You can have a lawyer that is Black, right? That is possible, but we have to start thinking and prioritizing that that's necessary as it relates to our strategic planning. Not the strategic planning that says, hey, individual A, who just so happens to be Black, please look at my strategic plan and give me your thoughts. No, we want individual A to be a part of the table, to be a part of the discussion. So from point A to point B, they're a part of the experience and adding value to your conversations in the process. Thank you for sharing that.
Deirdre, if people are interested, the Des Moines Public Library is offering unlimited for the next 4 weeks. So you want to talk about race as a digital download.
Ah.
So there's no waiting, no
next 2 weeks.
4.
Next 4 weeks. I've just heard right here, Des Moines Register. Next 4 weeks, the Des Moines Public Library is offering no limitations. What's the book called again?
So you want to talk about race.
So you want to talk about race. They are offering that. If that's of interest to anyone, we love public libraries. It's an ebook. You can go to your online account, giving the Des Moines Public Library a plug. Thank you for offering that. There are no limitations on that download for the next 4 weeks. Looks like we've got a question. Heather's going to read it to me.
Jackie Norris, do you think the loans are solely connected to income?
You know, I think the accessibility to loans, oh, I'm going to repeat the question. The question was, if you didn't see the chat, do I think that the loans, the correlation of the dial rates are connected to income? Income does have something to do with that, but credit scores also have something to do with that. We are finding, just through the work that we're doing with our youth and summer youth employment programs, we're coaching them and pulling their credit, and we're finding that at the age of 16, our youth have terrible credit scores. Why? Because their moms or dads or family members are having to put their electricity bill in the kid's name. And when, you know, a challenge happens with the family and they're unable to pay that electricity bill or that water bill, and it's reported to the credit bureau, it is impacting that child's credit. And so our credit system has a great deal to do with loan approval rates, the requirements that these financial institutions have, and the lack of flexibility that is connected to these loan products also has something to do with it. And so I think there's a number of things that can be done. The investment in coaching can definitely do a lot to make sure that people are best prepared when they walk into the financial institution, remembering that we are still creating synergies of trust, because over 50% of our population has dismal relationships with financial institutions. That's going to go the distance for us. That coaching will best prepare them. Now, the other component is ensuring that our financial institutions receive coaching and understanding that, the products and services and the way that they are offering has unintended consequences and are essentially carving so much of our population out in obtaining those products and services. We've got folks that are getting denied to open a checking account. I know some of you all probably didn't know that, but there's this thing called check systems. And if you've had habitual overdrafts at your financial institution and you go to another one, and maybe you haven't finished out paying all those overdraft fees, that financial institution can deny you. They can deny you from getting a checking account. They can deny you from getting a savings account. And so there's so much work that we can do better to ensure that we're setting people up for success as it relates to financial inclusion. Got one more question.
From Facebook. Kent Sovereign asks, what state laws related to banking and financial services place barriers for participation in banking and or credit services from banks and credit unions?
Kent, that is a very, very complex question. And if there are any folks in the banking industry here right now that would like to share, I am not as beefed up on the financial policy, but I will speak to this. One of the things that you all learned earlier was that 70% of African Americans rent their homes in Polk County, compared to about 30% of everyone. And if we know that, and we know that African Americans are having challenges developing good credit scores because of lack of access or missing a payment, if we know they're paying their rent, why can't we enact a policy, as some communities have done, because the credit bureaus allow this, that requires landlords to offer up to their tenants an option to opt in to reporting their rent payments to the credit bureau so they can get credit for that. Philip mentioned it earlier. He had a neighbor who stayed near him for 8 years, paying $1,200 a month, and had literally nothing to show for it. That's a policy that we could enact in our community to ensure that people are getting credit for what they're doing, because they're getting a credit check to live in that space. And if they owe anything after they leave that space, it's going to harm their credit, right? And so the reason why I say opt in is because not everybody pays their rent on time due to the other challenges that you've heard earlier today. But for those who are, let's give them some value add there. Help them build their credit by reporting their good rent history to the credit bureau.
Last question.
Last question.
From Frank Thomas. Is there a way to work with the credit determining and evaluation agencies to have them rethink how they evaluate everyone, not just poor people and people of color?
Yes, there is a way. And I know that there is legislation that has been drafted on the federal level to minimize that and to ensure that the way in which the actuaries, if you will, are analyzing risk, that race is not a factor in that risk analyzation. But you are correct, Frank. There is a greater challenge ahead of us, which is why that loan number is an increase of 0.5%, because there is so much work that can be done on the federal level to positively impact our banking system.
And just before they bring everybody back, there's one more question from Allison Van Pelt. Were there any indicators, metrics, strategies that are related to inclusion in public financial decisions, CIPs, city budgets, any spending of tax dollars as well, since public disinvestment in neighborhoods can lead to private disinvestment as well?
For this report, there wasn't, but I think that is an excellent idea. And that is something that so many of our organizations are talking about right now. That is one of the reasons why we talked about the unintended consequences of so much of this subject matter that not just is subject to financial inclusion, but all of the subject matters that we've discussed today, is the fact that decisions have been made without the inclusion or the thought or the addition of the Black experience. And as a result, when these decisions have been made, the unintended consequences have negatively impacted the Black community. And so if we can do our due diligence to ensure that we're making spaces for Black individuals that are interested in housing, that are interested in education or entrepreneurship or any of the other topics that I shared today, if there is a space on your board to share those experiences, because it's not enough to just get someone that's Black on your board. We want to get someone that's Black and interested in the subject matter. Because I know sometimes we think, oh, I've got a Black friend over here, come sit on my board for me. But what if that Black friend isn't interested in that subject matter? And they're simply saying yes because they're your friend, right? We have to be intentional about this work. Now, does that take more time? Yes. Unfortunately, it does take more time. But what we have seen over time is that efficiency is not on the side of Black America. Efficiency is not on the side of Black Iowa. And so if we can invest a little bit more time so that we can get a bigger return on the back end, that's where our mindset is right now. And so as it relates to your question, our goal is to ensure that these conversations are had in a room where people are accepting and open to hearing the Black experience and the unintended consequences of our systems. All right, so I'm going to step off and we're going to bring on Terry Caldwell-Johnson for closing remarks. Thank you again for everyone who is interested in financial inclusion. Thank you for your patience in this process, and we're so excited that you're signing on to be part of One Economy.
Well, we've gone a little longer than we had originally planned, but I hope that the additional time has given you a chance to really think about your place in One Economy and the opportunity that is presented today for everyone to carve out just a little piece of the One Economy space that they're going to own. As I said earlier today, this is really not just about Black people getting involved in this work. It's about all of us getting involved in this work. And in closing, I want to share with you just a few things that I would like for you to consider start doing as we think about the time in history that we find ourselves in right now and ways that we can begin to move the needle around the issues of race and our ability to move closer to One Economy. I want everyone to start reading and educating yourself about race, equity, and social justice. If you want to start with the One Economy report, that's great, because we think that that's a great way to jumpstart your education and your information. We also want you to start having conversations about race with your children, no matter how hard they may be. Because the conversations you have with your children will, with time, change the conversations that Black people have to have with their children. We want you to start showing up at rallies and protests and city council meetings and school board meetings, because we know that when you show up at those meetings, your voice becomes the microphone that is used to broadcast the struggle, the issue, and the challenges of the day. So join the chorus of voices calling for change. And finally, we want you to start understanding that representation matters. What are you doing to ensure there are other voices at the table in your corporations, on your boards, and in elected spaces? It is important for us to understand that when voices are not heard, someone is being silenced. Thank you for joining us today for the One Economy Blueprint Rollout. We hope that you took away a few nuggets of information. We hope that you heard our challenge, but more importantly, we hope that you will pull up a seat to the table and join us in creating One Economy. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your participation. Thank you.